The scent of lilies and stale grief hung heavy in the air. St. Jude's, a place I'd always associated with baptisms and a fleeting childhood fear of purgatory, now felt like a tomb. My wife, Eleanor, lay in that polished mahogany box, a serene smile plastered on her face, a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. It was a public performance, even in death. The handful of mourners, mostly distant relatives and a few of Eleanor's bridge club ladies, murmured condolences that felt as hollow as the pronouncements from the pulpit. I stood by the open grave, the damp New England air chilling me to the bone, despite the dark wool of my suit. 67 years had weathered me, but this was a different kind of cold. A betrayal that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long, I'd almost forgotten its existence. Almost. My gaze drifted across the somber faces, searching for a familiar one, a kind one, something to anchor me in this sea of sorrow. And then I saw him. Robert. My best friend since we were knee-high to a grasshopper, sharing scraped knees and dreams of baseball glory. He stood a little apart from the others, his shoulders hunched, his usually jovial face etched with a pain that mirrored my own, yet felt different. As the final prayer concluded, and the first shovel of earth hit the coffin with a dull thud, a collective sigh rippled through the mourners. People began to disperse, offering a final, watery handshake or a brief, awkward embrace. I was preparing to follow suit, to retreat into the sterile quiet of my empty house when Robert moved. He approached me, his steps heavy, deliberate. His eyes, usually sparkling with mischief, were dark and troubled. He didn't offer the perfunctory words of sympathy. Instead, as he reached my side, his hand resting briefly on my arm, he leaned in close. His voice, a low murmur meant only for my ears, cut through the residual hum of the gathering. "Arthur," he began, his breath smelling faintly of whiskey, "we need to talk. There's something you need to know, something I should have told you a long time ago." The words, stark and unexpected, landed like a physical blow. My head snapped up, my eyes locking with his. The grief, the shock of Eleanor's passing suddenly felt overshadowed by a new, unsettling dread. "Talk? Robert? What are you talking about? Now?" He looked around, ensuring no one was within earshot, then met my gaze again, his expression grave. "Here. Now. It's about Eleanor. About us. About everything." He paused, his jaw tightening. "It's about the truth. The truth. A concept that had become as elusive as a summer breeze in winter within my own home." I felt a tremor run through me. "What truth, Robert?" My voice was barely a whisper, lost in the vastness of the cemetery. He squeezed my arm, his grip surprisingly firm. "Meet me at the old diner, the one by the highway. An hour. Please, Arthur. You need to hear this." Before I could formulate a coherent response, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the thinning crowd, leaving me standing by my wife's grave with a question that was far more terrifying than the silence of death. The truth. What truth could possibly be so urgent, so devastating, that it needed to be whispered at my wife's funeral? The Highway Haven Diner was a relic, a chrome and formica shrine to a bygone era. Its neon sign, a faded beacon against the bruised twilight sky, flickered erratically, casting a sickly glow on the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. It was the kind of place where time seemed to warp, where conversations lingered, and secrets were often spilled over lukewarm coffee. It was, in short, the perfect setting for the confession Robert seemed intent on delivering. I parked my sensible sedan a little distance away, the engine ticking as it cooled, much like my own life felt to be doing. The drive from St. Jude's had been a blur, the unfamiliar weight of Robert's words pressing down on me. The truth. What truth could possibly involve Eleanor, my quiet, dependable Eleanor, and my oldest friend? My mind scrambled, conjuring 1,000 impossible scenarios, none of them offering any solace. Inside the diner was a symphony of clanking plates, hissing fryers, and the low murmur of conversation. The air was thick with the smell of fried onions and burnt coffee, a comforting, if unrefined, aroma. I spotted Robert in a booth by the window, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked smaller than I remembered, the years weighing heavily on him too. I slid into the booth opposite him, the vinyl seat groaning under my weight. He didn't look up immediately, his gaze fixed on the swirling patterns in his coffee. When he finally met my eyes, the same turmoil was there, amplified by the harsh diner lighting. "Arthur," he said, his voice rough. "Thanks for coming." "What is it, Robert?" I asked, my own voice strained. You said you had something to tell me." "About Eleanor." He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. He fiddled with the sugar dispenser, the small metal cylinder rattling against the Formica tabletop. "It's not easy, Arthur. Never thought I'd be the one to break something like this." He finally looked directly at me, his eyes pleading for understanding or perhaps just forgiveness. "Eleanor and I," he began, the words tumbling out, hesitant at first, then gaining momentum. We had an affair." The world tilted. The clatter of the diner faded into a distant hum. The words hung in the air, impossibly heavy, impossibly real. I stared at him, my mind refusing to process what he had just said. An affair. Eleanor. Robert. My Eleanor? My Robert? It was a sentence so alien, so out of place. It felt like a cruel joke. "What?" I managed to croak out, the sound foreign to my own ears. An affair? With Eleanor? My wife?" Robert nodded, his gaze dropping to his hands, which were now clenched on the table. "Yes, Arthur. For a long time. Years. Years." The word echoed in the sudden, deafening silence within my own head. Years of shared meals, of laughter, of what I had believed to be a quiet, if unexciting, companionship. Years of shared secrets, it seemed, but none of them mine. How long? The question was a raw, guttural sound. "It started about maybe 5 years ago," he confessed, his voice barely audible. It was a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake. 5 years. 5 years of lies. 5 years of looking into Eleanor's eyes and seeing a stranger. 5 years of sharing my life with a woman who was sharing her deepest intimacies with my best friend. The betrayal was so profound, so all-encompassing, it threatened to shatter me into a million pieces. Why? The single word was a question, an accusation, a plea. "Why, Robert? Why would you do that? Why would she do that?" He finally looked up, his eyes glistening. "I don't have all the answers, Arthur. I wish I did. I was lost. She was unhappy. We found comfort in each other. It was wrong. So incredibly wrong." He paused, his voice cracking. "And I'm so sorry, Arthur. More than words can ever say. Sorry." A word, like truth, that felt utterly insufficient to bridge the chasm he had just opened between us, between my past and my present. I pushed myself away from the table, the booth scraping loudly against the floor. My hands trembled as I reached for my wallet. I threw a $20 bill onto the table, more than enough for his coffee. I can't right now, Robert," I stammered, my voice thick with unshed tears and a rising tide of rage. I need to go." I stumbled out of the diner, the neon sign blinking mockingly behind me. The night air, once cool and refreshing, now felt suffocating. The truth, it turned out, was far more devastating than any lie, and it had only just begun to unfold. The drive home was a nightmare. My hands, slick with sweat, wrestled with the steering wheel. The familiar streets of my quiet suburban neighborhood, usually a source of comfort, now felt alien, imbued with a sinister new meaning. Every streetlight, every darkened window seemed to mock me, harboring the secrets I had been so blissfully unaware of. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house loomed before me, a dark, silent monolith. It had been Eleanor's sanctuary, our shared space for 35 years. Now it felt like a mausoleum, haunted by the ghost of a marriage I thought I knew. I fumbled with the key, the lock clicking with a finality that echoed the finality of Eleanor's death. The front door creaked open, revealing the same hushed entryway, the same faint scent of lavender potpourri that Eleanor always kept by the console table. But now, it all felt different, tarnished, corrupted. I walked through the house on autopilot, my body numb, my mind a chaotic whirl of Robert's confession and Eleanor's face. The living room, where we'd spent countless evenings, the television a low hum in the background, now felt like a stage set for a play I hadn't understood. The dining room, where we'd celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, now echoed with the phantom sounds of laughter that was, perhaps, never truly shared. I found myself in the kitchen, the heart of any home, or at least it had been for us. The breakfast nook, where we'd discussed our days over coffee, now seemed eerily still. A single unwashed mug sat by the sink, a stark reminder of Eleanor's last breakfast, her last lie. I picked it up, the ceramic cool against my fingertips. Was this the mug she'd used that morning? Had she been thinking of Robert? Had she been planning her next meeting? The questions clawed at me, each one a fresh stab wound. I walked into our bedroom, the sanctuary of our intimacy. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken words and hidden desires. Eleanor's side of the closet was still as she'd left it, a carefully curated collection of sensible blouses and tailored slacks. Her perfume, a subtle floral scent, still lingered on her scarves. It was a stark contrast to the woman Robert had described, a woman who sought comfort in another man's arms. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping slightly. This bed, our bed. How many nights had they? No, I couldn't go there. I wouldn't. But the thoughts, unbidden and unwelcome, flooded my mind, painting vivid, agonizing pictures. The intimacy I had cherished, the quiet understanding that had formed the bedrock of our marriage, was now revealed as a carefully constructed facade. I looked at a framed photograph on the bedside table. Eleanor and I, younger, happier, on a vacation to the coast. Her smile was genuine, her arm linked through mine. Was that smile a lie? Was the entire 35 years a lie? The weight of that possibility was crushing. I spent hours just wandering, touching objects that were once familiar, now imbued with a sinister significance. The armchair where Eleanor always read her books, the delicate china teacups she so carefully preserved. Each item, once a symbol of our shared life, now felt like a testament to her deceit. The silence of the house was deafening. It was a silence that was no longer peaceful, but pregnant with the ghosts of what had transpired behind closed doors. I felt utterly alone, adrift in a sea of memories that had suddenly turned treacherous. Robert's confession had ripped away the veil of my reality, exposing a truth I was not prepared to face. The man who had been my confidant for decades had also been my wife's lover. The woman I had loved and trusted implicitly had betrayed me in the most profound way imaginable. As the night wore on and the house grew colder, I knew one thing with chilling certainty. My life as I had known it was over, and the journey to understanding the depth of this betrayal and finding a way to navigate the wreckage had just begun. The next morning dawned grey and unforgiving, much like my mood. The raw grief of Eleanor's death was now inextricably tangled with the searing pain of Robert's revelation. Sleep had offered no escape. My dreams were a chaotic jumble of Eleanor's serene funeral smile and Robert's tormented confession. I needed answers. Not the vague, guilt-ridden platitudes Robert had offered, but the unvarnished, painful truth. I knew I couldn't let this fester, not in the silence of my own home. I had to confront Robert, and perhaps in a way, confront Eleanor's memory too. I found him at his small, cluttered workshop in his garage, the place where he tinkered with old clocks, a hobby that had always seemed so wonderfully simple, so uncomplicated. He was hunched over a dismantled grandfather clock, tiny gears and springs scattered across his workbench. The scent of oil and old wood hung in the air. He looked up as I entered, his expression guarded. The easy camaraderie we once shared was gone, replaced by an awkward tension that stretched between us like a taut wire. "Arthur," he said, his voice low, I didn't expect to see you." "Where else would I go, Robert?" I asked, my voice flat. "You dropped a bomb on my life yesterday. I think I deserve a little more than a whispered confession at a funeral." He sighed, putting down his tools. He gestured to a worn stool. "Sit down, Arthur." I remained standing, unwilling to settle into a semblance of normalcy. "Tell me everything, Robert, all of it. No more half-truths, no more convenient omissions. I want to know when it started, how it happened, and why. Why you, of all people?" He ran a hand over his face, his eyes heavy with exhaustion and regret. "It started about 5 years ago. Eleanor, she wasn't happy. We both know that, Arthur. She felt invisible, unseen. And I was going through my own struggles. My divorce from Carol was finalizing, and I was feeling pretty low." He paused, looking out at the rain-streaked window. "We were at that charity gala, remember? The one for the children's hospital. Eleanor had had a difficult day, and I'd just gotten some bad news about the house sale. We ended up talking, really talking, for the first time in years, maybe. And then?" I prompted, my voice hardening. "And then we had a few too many drinks. And things happened. It was a moment of weakness, Arthur. A shared loneliness, I suppose. We both regretted it immediately. We swore it would never happen again. His words hung in the air, but I knew, even as he spoke them, that they were lies, or at least partial truths. "But it did happen again, didn't it, Robert?" He nodded, his gaze fixed on the scattered gears. "Yes, it did. It became a pattern, a terrible, destructive pattern. We told ourselves it was just physical, that it didn't mean anything, that we were just finding solace, but it was a lie. It was a betrayal of everything." "And Eleanor?" I asked, my voice rough. "What did she say? Did she ever express remorse to you? Did she ever talk about me?" Robert's face contorted with pain. She felt immense guilt, Arthur. She loved you. She told me that many times. She said she didn't know how it happened, how they got so lost. She felt trapped. But she also said she found a connection with me that she hadn't found with you for a long time. The words hit me like a physical blow. A connection she hadn't found with me, the man she had married, the man who had built a life with her. I felt a wave of nausea. "Did you love her, Robert?" The question was a desperate whisper. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain that I recognized, a pain that was now intertwined with my own. "Arthur, I cared for Eleanor, deeply, but I never stopped being your friend. This was a mistake, a catastrophic one, and I have lived with the guilt of it every single day, especially when I was with you, pretending everything was fine." He picked up a small gear, turning it over in his fingers. "The truth is, Arthur, I've been wrestling with this for years. Should I tell you? Would it destroy you? Would it destroy our friendship? When Eleanor got sick, it made it worse. I thought maybe she would confess, but she didn't. And when she died, I couldn't let you go on not knowing, not living a lie, even in grief. I stood there, the rain drumming against the garage roof, the dismantled clock a metaphor for my shattered life. The man I had trusted above all others had been sleeping with my wife. The woman I had loved for decades had been living a double life. "I need to go," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Robert nodded, his gaze still fixed on the workbench. "Arthur, I understand. Whatever you decide about our friendship, I'll accept it. But I couldn't keep this from you, not anymore." I walked out of the garage, leaving him alone with his broken clocks and his broken conscience. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained a uniform, oppressive grey. The truth was out, and now the real work of picking up the pieces, of understanding the depth of this betrayal and finding a path forward, had to begin. The days that followed were a surreal blur. The funeral was over, the casseroles had stopped arriving, and the silence in the house was no longer just quiet. It was a gaping wound. I found myself replaying every conversation, every shared glance, every gesture with Eleanor, trying to decipher the hidden meanings, the coded messages I had so carelessly overlooked. Robert's confession had been brutal, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. The sheer magnitude of the deception was overwhelming. He had been my best friend, my brother in all but blood. Eleanor, my wife, the center of my universe. How could they have built this elaborate lie right under my nose? One afternoon, driven by a morbid curiosity and a desperate need to understand, I found myself in Eleanor's study. It was a room I rarely entered, her domain of quiet contemplation. She kept her personal papers here, her journals, her correspondence. It felt like an invasion, but I knew I had to delve into her world, the world she had shared with Robert. Her desk was meticulously organized, just as I'd expected. I hesitated, my hand hovering over a leather-bound journal. This felt like the ultimate betrayal of her privacy, but my own sense of reality had been so thoroughly dismantled, I needed tangible proof, a deeper understanding of her inner turmoil. With trembling hands, I opened the journal. The elegant script, so familiar, now seemed to hold a sinister beauty. The early entries were mundane, observations about the garden, complaints about the weather, reflections on social events. Then, gradually, the tone shifted. October 14th. Robert called today. "Just checking in," he said, but his voice, "It's the only one that truly hears me anymore. Arthur is kind, he's good, but he's absent, lost in his own world. I feel like a ghost in my own home." The word stung. Absent. Was that how she saw me? Had I become so engrossed in my work, my own quiet routines, that I had allowed my wife to drift away? I turned the pages, each entry a testament to her growing unhappiness, her burgeoning feelings for Robert. There were no explicit details of their physical encounters, but the emotional intimacy was laid bare. November 29th. We met for coffee today, just an hour, but it felt like breathing again. He understands. He sees me. I feel so guilty, but I also feel alive. Is that wrong? To feel alive? January 10th. Arthur mentioned Robert the other day. Asked if I'd heard from him. I lied, of course. My heart pounded in my chest. It's a dangerous game we're playing, Robert and I, but I can't seem to stop. The entries became more frequent, more intense. It wasn't just a fling, it was an emotional entanglement that had deepened over time. She spoke of shared dreams, of a connection that transcended the physical. She painted Robert not as a predator, but as a kindred spirit, someone who saw the parts of her that I had apparently missed. March 5th. I confessed my fears to Robert today, my fear of growing old alone, even when Arthur is beside me. He held my hand. He didn't judge, he just understood. I love him, Arthur. I think I really do. Love. The word hit me with the force of a physical blow. She loved Robert, my best friend. The betrayal was no longer just about sex. It was about a love that had blossomed in the shadows of my own marriage. I continued reading, each entry a fresh wave of agony. She wrote about her guilt, her fear of discovery, but also about the thrill of their secret life, the escape it offered from her perceived loneliness. She even wrote about moments of shared joy with Robert, moments that had been stolen from our life together. My own memories began to shift, to reconfigure themselves under this new, harsh light. I remembered Eleanor's increased quietness, her unexplained moods, her distant smiles. I had attributed it to the natural ebb and flow of a long marriage, perhaps even the early signs of her illness. Now I saw it as a symptom of a deeper, more complex unhappiness, an unhappiness she had sought to fill with another man. Tears streamed down my face, blurring the elegant script. It wasn't just Robert who had betrayed me. It was Eleanor, too. The woman I had loved, the woman I had mourned, had been living a secret life, a life that had somehow excluded me entirely. I closed the journal, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The room felt colder, emptier than before. I had sought the truth and I had found it, but the truth was a bitter pill, leaving a taste of ashes in my mouth. Eleanor, the woman I thought I knew, was gone, replaced by a stranger whose pain and desires had led her down a path of profound deception. And I, Arthur, had been too oblivious, too self-absorbed to see it. The weight of Eleanor's secrets pressed down on me, a physical burden that made every breath a struggle. I felt like an archaeologist unearthing the ruins of my own life, discovering a civilization that had flourished in secret, leaving me utterly oblivious. Robert's confession had been the initial tremor, but reading Eleanor's journal was the earthquake that leveled everything. I found myself avoiding Robert. Every time my phone rang, I half expected it to be him, wanting to talk, to confess more, to seek forgiveness. But I couldn't face him. The image of him with Eleanor, not just in a moment of weakness, but over years, as her confidant, her lover, her love, was a constant, tormenting presence. Our shared history, our decades of friendship now felt tainted, a vast landscape littered with hidden pitfalls. I started looking at old photographs, pictures of Robert and me, grinning on fishing trips, clinking glasses at birthdays, pictures of Eleanor and me at weddings, at family gatherings, her hand tucked into my arm. They were snapshots of a life that now seemed fabricated. Were those smiles genuine? Were those moments of apparent happiness merely a sophisticated performance? One evening I found myself staring at a photo from our 30th anniversary party. Eleanor looked radiant, her eyes sparkling. Robert was there too, his arm around my shoulder, a broad smile on his face. We looked like the picture of contentment, a picture of perfect friendship and marital bliss. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. They were celebrating my life, my marriage, while harboring a secret that would ultimately destroy it. The house, once a place of quiet comfort, now felt like a museum of lost illusions. I would catch myself looking at Eleanor's favorite armchair, remembering her curled up with a book, and then the image would morph into her sharing intimate moments with Robert. The kitchen, where we'd shared countless breakfasts, now seemed to echo with their hushed conversations. I began to scrutinize my own behavior. Had I missed the signs? Had I been so wrapped up in my own world that I had failed to see the growing chasm between Eleanor and me? Robert had said she felt invisible. Had I made her feel that way? The guilt gnawed at me. It was a different kind of guilt than Robert's or Eleanor's. A guilt of omission, of a failure to see, to connect, to love her fully. I tried to focus on work, on the mundane tasks that had once occupied my days. But my mind would wander, replaying Eleanor's words from her journal, trying to reconcile the woman I had loved with the woman who had sought solace in another man's arms. She had loved me, she had said, but she had also loved Robert. How could both be true? One rainy Tuesday, an old photo album surfaced from the back of a closet. It was filled with pictures from our early years, our honeymoon, the birth of our nieces and nephews. There was a raw, unvarnished joy in those early images, a sense of boundless possibility. I sat on the floor, flipping through the pages, a lump in my throat. Those were the days before Robert became a constant fixture in our lives, before the routine set in, before the silence began to grow. I remembered Eleanor's laughter, the way she used to hum while she gardened, the passion she once had for painting. Where had that spark gone? Had I extinguished it, or had she lost it herself? The lines blurred, the responsibility diffused, leaving me with a profound sense of loss and confusion. I knew I couldn't continue like this, lost in a labyrinth of past regrets and present pain. Robert had given me a piece of the truth. Eleanor's journal had given me another. But the full picture, the complete narrative of their affair and my own unwitting role in it, remained elusive. The weight of their shared secrets was immense. But now I carried a new weight, the burden of knowing. And with that knowledge came the daunting task of deciding what to do next. Could I ever forgive them? Could I ever forgive myself? The path ahead was shrouded in fog, and the familiar landscape of my life had been irrevocably altered. The silence in the house had become a character in itself, a constant companion that amplified my inner turmoil. I was living in a world of shadows, where the familiar had become strange, and the trusted had become the source of my deepest pain. The weight of Eleanor's secrets, coupled with Robert's betrayal, had left me emotionally adrift. I found myself pacing the rooms, replaying fragments of conversations, searching for clues that I had missed. Had Eleanor ever hinted at her unhappiness to anyone else? Had Robert ever given me a sign, a subtle warning that I had dismissed? The what-ifs were a relentless chorus in my mind. One afternoon, while sifting through some of Eleanor's old correspondence, I came across a series of letters from her sister, Margaret. Margaret lived in Florida, and they had always been close. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for the worn envelope. Could Margaret offer any insight? Had Eleanor confided in her sister about the true depth of her marital dissatisfaction? The letters, written in Margaret's bold, hurried script, painted a picture of a woman who was struggling. "Dearest Eleanor," one letter began, "I was so sorry to hear you've been feeling under the weather lately. You sound so down. Is everything all right with Arthur? You always sound a little distant when you talk about him these days. Remember, you can always talk to me, you know that." Another letter, dated a few months later. "Ellie, I know you don't want to talk about it, but I worry about you. You seem so lost. Are you sure you're happy? Please don't feel you have to put on a brave face for me. I just want you to be well." These were not the words of a woman who was content. They were the words of someone who saw the cracks forming, someone who was worried about their sister. But Eleanor, it seemed, had maintained her facade, perhaps even with her own sister. She had chosen to keep her pain and her affair a secret. The implications were staggering. Eleanor had been unhappy for a long time, perhaps longer than even Robert had realized. Her connection with Robert wasn't just an escape. It was a desperate attempt to find solace and companionship that she felt was missing in her marriage. I sat back, the letters scattered on the coffee table. The blame, I realized, wasn't solely on Eleanor or Robert. My own part in her unhappiness, however unintentional, was undeniable. I had become complacent, assuming that our long marriage meant automatic contentment. I had failed to nurture our connection, to actively engage with her emotional needs. The unanswered questions gnawed at me. Did Eleanor truly love Robert, or was he simply a convenient refuge? Did Robert truly love Eleanor, or was he also seeking something he lacked? And what about our friendship, Robert and mine? Could it ever be salvaged, or was it too irrevocably broken? The thought of confronting Robert again, of trying to piece together the narrative of their affair and my own blindness, was exhausting. Yet, I knew I couldn't simply bury my head in the sand. This betrayal, this unraveling of my life, demanded more than passive grief. I looked out the window at the setting sun, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was a beautiful, serene scene, a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. I thought of Eleanor's love for sunsets, how she would often sit by the window just watching them. Had those quiet moments been filled with regret, with longing, or with the secret thrill of her clandestine relationship? The unspoken questions hung heavy in the air, a palpable presence in the quiet house. I knew I couldn't get the answers I truly craved, the definitive reasons behind their actions, the true depth of their feelings. But I could, perhaps, find a way to understand. To understand Eleanor's pain, Robert's weakness and my own complicity. The path forward was unclear. Rebuilding trust, if that was even possible, seemed like an insurmountable task. But for the first time in days, a flicker of resolve ignited within me. I wouldn't let this destroy me. I would face the wreckage, acknowledge the broken pieces, and try to find a way to build something new, however fragile. The unspoken questions would likely remain, but perhaps in time I could learn to live with them. The silence between Robert and me had become a chasm, wider and deeper than any argument could ever create. Days turned into weeks, and his absence from my life was a palpable void. He was the constant in my world for so long, the man I turned to for everything from advice on car repairs to discussions about politics. Now his silence was a deafening indictment of our shattered friendship. I wrestled with the decision of whether to reach out. Part of me, the part that still clung to the memories of our shared youth and unwavering loyalty, yearned to mend the rift. But the other part, the part that had been seared by the revelation of his affair with Eleanor, recoiled at the thought. How could I ever look him in the eye again, knowing what I knew? One crisp autumn afternoon, as I was raking leaves in the front yard, a car pulled into my driveway. My heart skipped a beat. It was Robert's familiar, slightly battered SUV. He got out, looking older and more careworn than I remembered. He was carrying a small potted plant, a peace lily, its white spathes a stark contrast to the vibrant green of its leaves. He walked towards me, his steps hesitant. We stood there for a moment, the rustling leaves the only sound between us. The unspoken questions hung heavy, a tangible barrier. "Arthur," he began, his voice rough with emotion. I don't know what to say." I continued raking, the rhythmic scraping of the tines against the grass a distraction from the knot in my stomach. "There's not much to say, is there, Robert?" He flinched, and I felt a pang of something akin to guilt, quickly buried by the resentment. "I brought you this," he said, gesturing to the plant. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I thought maybe it could bring a little life back into the house." I dropped the rake, the sound sharp in the quiet afternoon. I looked at him, really looked at him, the lines etched around his eyes, the weariness in his posture. He was my best friend, and he was also the man who had betrayed me. The duality was almost unbearable. "Eleanor loved peace lilies," I said, my voice flat. "I know," he replied softly. "She always said they were forgiving plants." The words hung in the air, loaded with unintended meaning. Forgiving. Was that what he was asking for, or what he hoped I could eventually offer? "Why now, Robert?" I asked, the question I had been carrying for weeks finally escaping my lips. "Why wait until after she was gone?" He sighed, a sound heavy with years of regret. "Because, Arthur, I was a coward. I was afraid of destroying our friendship. I was afraid of the consequences, and maybe I was hoping she would tell you herself, but she never did. And when she died, I couldn't live with myself anymore. Knowing that you were grieving and you didn't know the full story, it felt wrong, profoundly wrong." He looked at the ground, his shoulders slumping. "I know that doesn't excuse anything. I've made a terrible mistake. 2 terrible mistakes, really. Betraying you and betraying Eleanor's memory by keeping this secret." We stood in silence for a long time, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the lawn. The air was filled with the scent of fallen leaves and the unspoken grief that bound us, however painfully. "Did you love her, Robert?" I asked, the question I had wrestled with in the quiet of my home. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. There was no evasion, no prevarication. "I cared for her, Arthur, deeply. She was my confidant, my solace, but I never stopped loving you as my friend. This whole thing, it was a tangled mess of loneliness and weakness, and it's been eating me alive. I didn't offer forgiveness. I didn't offer absolution, but I also didn't slam the door in his face. The friendship we shared was too old, too deeply ingrained to be so easily discarded even after such a profound betrayal. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Robert," I said, my voice heavy with the truth of it. "Not now, maybe not ever." He nodded, his gaze steady. "I understand, Arthur. I deserve that. I needed to say it. To you. To face you." I gestured towards the porch. "Bring the plant. Let's go inside." It was a small step, a tentative bridge across the chasm. We sat in the living room, the peace lily placed on the coffee table between us, a silent green testament to shared grief and the possibility, however slim, of future understanding. The conversation was stilted, awkward, punctuated by long silences, but it was a start. The silence of shared grief, I realized, was different from the silence of estrangement. It was a silence that acknowledged the pain, but also, perhaps, held the seeds of healing. The peace lily sat on the coffee table, a silent witness to the fragile truce that had settled between Robert and me. We talked, tentatively at first, then with a grudging honesty that felt like picking at a wound. He spoke of his own regrets, the loneliness that had plagued him after his divorce, the unexpected comfort he'd found in Eleanor's company. I, in turn, spoke of my own obliviousness, my failure to see Eleanor's unhappiness, the ways in which I had allowed our marriage to drift. But even as we spoke, the ghost of what was, the man I thought Robert was, the wife I thought Eleanor was, loomed large. Every shared memory, every past conversation, now felt like a carefully constructed lie, a scene in a play where only they knew the true script. I found myself scrutinizing Eleanor's belongings with a newfound intensity, not out of a desire for more pain, but out of a desperate need to understand the woman I had shared my life with. I went through her closet, her books, her little trinkets. I was looking for, I wasn't sure what, a sign perhaps that the Eleanor I remembered, the loving wife, the kind soul, had not been entirely a fabrication. One evening, I stumbled upon a small, locked wooden box tucked away in the back of her wardrobe. My heart pounded. This felt significant. I remembered Eleanor being quite private about this box, a place she often kept her most personal mementos. I found the key on a chain around her neck, the one I'd buried with her. It felt like a desecration to use it, but the need to know was overwhelming. Inside, nestled amongst dried flowers and old letters, were photographs. Not the usual family snapshots, but candid shots of Eleanor and Robert. They were taken in various locations, a park, a quiet cafe, even what looked like a secluded beach. In these photos, Eleanor's smile was different. It was unguarded, joyful, a radiance I hadn't seen directed at me in years. There was an undeniable intimacy in their poses, a comfortable closeness that spoke of a deep, shared history. Seeing these images was like a physical blow. It wasn't just about the affair, it was about the life they had built together in the shadows, a life that had clearly brought her a happiness I had failed to provide. The guilt I felt for my own failings was now compounded by the raw, visceral pain of seeing my wife truly happy with another man. There were also letters, not from Robert, but to him. They were filled with a raw vulnerability, detailing her fears, her hopes, her deep affection for him. She wrote about the guilt she felt towards me, but also about the undeniable pull she felt towards Robert, a pull that seemed to eclipse everything else. "My dearest R," one letter began, "I sit here, and the quiet of this house is deafening. Arthur is in his study, lost in his work as usual. I wish he could see me, truly see me. But you do, don't you? You see the woman beneath the wife, the woman who yearns for something more. I'm so afraid, R. Afraid of hurting Arthur, afraid of losing you, afraid of what this means." Another letter, later in the stack. "It's getting harder, R. The lies are becoming a part of me. But then I see you and the world makes sense again. You are my anchor, my true north. I don't know how much longer I can keep living this double life, but I don't know how to stop either." I closed the box, my hands trembling. The truth, I was learning, was a multifaceted thing, and each layer I uncovered only revealed a deeper, more painful reality. Eleanor hadn't simply sought comfort. She had found love, a love that had grown and flourished, eclipsing the one she shared with me. The ghost of the Eleanor I had loved and lost was fading, replaced by the complex, contradictory woman who had loved another man. And in the quiet of our home, surrounded by the remnants of our shared life, I was left to confront the devastating truth of her hidden heart and the chilling realization of my own blindness. The ghost of what was, both of our marriage and of our friendship, haunted every corner, a constant reminder of the life that had been and the one that could never be again. The discovery of Eleanor's box had shifted something within me. The anger, the hurt, the confusion, they were still there, but they were now overlaid with a profound sadness, a somber resignation. The ghost of our marriage, once a source of torment, was beginning to feel like a specter of a past I could no longer reclaim. My conversations with Robert continued, but they were different now. The tentative truce had given way to a more somber, reflective tone. We spoke less of the immediate pain and more of the long arc of our lives, the choices we had made, the paths we had taken. "I keep thinking about all those years, Arthur," Robert said one evening, as we sat in my living room, the peace lily a silent observer between us. "All those times we sat here, right in this room, talking about anything and everything, and she was here too, listening, perhaps even participating. And all the while," he trailed off, unable to articulate the magnitude of the deception. "And all the while," I finished, my voice quiet, "she was living a whole other life, with you." "It wasn't a life I ever intended," Robert confessed, his gaze fixed on the flickering fireplace. "It started as a distraction, a shared moment of vulnerability, but it grew, and I let it grow. I should have stopped it. I should have told you, Arthur. God, I should have told you from the very beginning." "But you didn't," I stated, not as an accusation but as a simple, undeniable fact. "And she didn't either. We built a life, Robert, a shared life, and it was built on a foundation of secrets." "I know," he murmured, "and I can't change that. I can only apologize and try to be present now, if you'll let me." The offer of his presence, of his renewed friendship, was a complex thing. Part of me craved it, the comfort of a familiar face, a shared history. But the hurt ran too deep. The image of Eleanor, radiant and happy in photographs with him, was a constant reminder of what I had lost and what he had taken. "I don't know if I can, Robert," I admitted, the words raw and honest. "The trust, it's gone, shattered. I look at you and I see the man I knew, my best friend, but I also see the man who loved my wife." He nodded, his expression etched with pain. "I understand, and I don't expect you to forget, or to pretend. But I'm here, Arthur. If you ever want to talk, if you ever need anything, I'll be here." His words were a lifeline, however frayed. I didn't know if our friendship could ever be fully restored, if the ghost of Eleanor and their affair would forever haunt our interactions. But the fact that he was willing to sit with me in the wreckage to acknowledge the pain meant something. I found myself drawn to Eleanor's garden. She had poured so much of herself into it. The vibrant roses, the carefully tended herbs, the meandering stone path. It was a place of beauty, of life, a stark contrast to the death and deception that had permeated our home. As I walked through it, I imagined her here, her hands in the soil, her mind perhaps miles away with Robert. But then I remembered her humming, her genuine delight in a newly bloomed flower, her quiet satisfaction in the order and beauty she cultivated. Was that also a lie? Or was it a glimpse of the true Eleanor, a woman who, despite her unhappiness and her betrayal, still found joy in the simple things? Perhaps that was the key, to acknowledge the complexities, the contradictions. Eleanor was not just a deceiver. She was also a woman who had struggled, who had sought love and connection, however misguidedly. And Robert, my friend, was not just a betrayer. He was also a man who had succumbed to loneliness and weakness. The weight of unspoken words, the words of love, of regret, of confession still lingered. But as I stood in Eleanor's garden, surrounded by the quiet hum of life, I felt a fragile sense of acceptance begin to bloom. The ghost of what was would always be a part of me, but perhaps, just perhaps, it didn't have to be the only presence in my life. The days continued their slow, relentless march forward. The initial shock of discovery had subsided, replaced by a dull ache, a constant undercurrent of grief and betrayal. I was learning to live with the ghosts, but their presence was undeniable, weaving themselves into the fabric of my everyday existence. My interactions with Robert were infrequent, marked by a cautious politeness. We had acknowledged the past, but the future of our friendship remained a precarious tightrope. He would call or stop by, offering a brief update on his life, a hesitant inquiry about mine. Each conversation felt like navigating a minefield, careful not to step on any lingering shards of resentment. One afternoon he came over with a box of old photographs. "I was clearing out my attic," he explained, his voice laced with a familiar weariness. "Thought you might want these." We sat together, sifting through decades of memories. There were photos of us as kids, awkward teenagers, young men full of swagger and dreams. There were pictures of Eleanor at parties on vacations, her smile bright and seemingly carefree. And then we came across a series of photos that made my stomach clench. Pictures of Eleanor and Robert at various events, often in the background, subtle yet undeniable. A shared glance, a hand on an arm, a closeness that spoke volumes. "She looks happy here," I murmured, pointing to a picture of Eleanor laughing, her head tilted towards Robert. Robert's gaze softened, a flicker of pain in his eyes. She was, sometimes, in those moments. It's complicated, Arthur." "Complicated is an understatement, Robert," I said, my voice sharp. The fragile peace we had established felt threatened. He held up his hands. I know. But you have to understand, Arthur. She confided in me. She felt seen, understood. Those moments, as wrong as they were real for her. And for me. Real for her," I repeated, the words hollow. "And what about me, Robert? What was real for me? The illusion I was living." The conversation, as it often did, circled back to the same painful points. We were caught in a loop of regret and recrimination, the threads of our shared past unraveling before our eyes. I began to notice subtle changes in myself. My appetite dwindled. Sleep became a luxury I rarely enjoyed. I found myself replaying Eleanor's journal entries, her confessions of guilt and longing, trying to reconcile them with the image of the woman I had known. The more I delved, the more elusive she became, her true self seeming to slip through my fingers like grains of sand. One evening, while organizing Eleanor's books, a small unmarked envelope fell out from between the pages of her favorite poetry collection. Inside were a few dried flowers and a single, short, unsigned note. "Sometimes the greatest love is the one that lets go." Who had written it? Was it Eleanor to Robert, Robert to Eleanor, or perhaps someone else entirely? The ambiguity was maddening. It was another thread, a loose end in the tangled tapestry of their affair and my own life. I realized then that I would never have all the answers. The full truth, the complete narrative of their hidden lives and my own unwitting role, was likely lost forever, buried beneath layers of deception and unspoken emotions. The unraveling threads of our shared past left me with a profound sense of loss, not just for Eleanor, but for the friendship I had cherished, the life I had believed in. The ghost of what was no longer just haunted my home. It was becoming a part of my very being. I was a man adrift, navigating the wreckage of a life that had been shattered by secrets, and the only certainty was the pervasive, lingering ache of unanswered questions. Forgiveness. The word felt alien, almost impossible. How could I forgive Robert for betraying our friendship? How could I forgive Eleanor for betraying our marriage? The concept felt like a distant shore, unattainable from where I stood, adrift in a sea of hurt. I tried to immerse myself in routine, clinging to the familiar rhythms of my life as if they were a life raft. I went to the grocery store, I paid my bills, I even attempted to read the newspaper. But every mundane task was colored by the knowledge of what had transpired. The cashier's polite smile, the headlines about distant conflicts, they all seemed distant, irrelevant to the profound personal upheaval I was experiencing. Robert and I continued our strained interactions. He would offer a hesitant greeting, a brief update, always respectful of the unspoken boundaries I had erected. He seemed to understand that my forgiveness was not a given, that it was something I had to grapple with on my own terms. One afternoon, he arrived with a box of old home videos. "I found these when I was going through some of my father's things," he said, his voice low. "Thought you might want to see them. There are some of Eleanor in here, from when we were all younger." We sat in the dim light of the living room, the projector whirring to life, casting flickering images onto the wall. There were grainy scenes of family picnics, birthday parties, and casual get-togethers. And there, amidst the youthful exuberance, was Eleanor. Younger, her smile brighter, her eyes full of a life I now understood had been yearning for something more. In one video she was laughing, her head thrown back, at something Robert had said. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, a sight that was both beautiful and agonizing. In another, she was holding my hand, her gaze directed at me, a soft, loving look that I hadn't realized I had lost. "She loved you, Arthur," Robert said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "She told me many times. She loved you, but she was also deeply unhappy and confused. Confused enough to build a life with you?" The words escaped before I could stop them. Robert flinched. "It wasn't planned, Arthur. None of it. It just happened. And the guilt, it was immense. For both of us. But we were also caught in something neither of us truly wanted, but couldn't seem to escape. Watching those videos, seeing Eleanor alive and vibrant, before the weight of her secrets had seemingly crushed her spirit, evoked a different kind of pain. It wasn't just anger or betrayal. It was a profound sadness for the life she had lost, for the marriage that had withered, and for the friendship that had been irrevocably broken. As the final image faded, leaving the room in darkness, I felt a shift within me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a softening. Seeing her younger, seeing the love she had once had for me, seeing the complex tangle of emotions that had led her down that path, it humanized her in a way that the raw pain of betrayal had obscured. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Robert," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Not fully, but I can try to understand, to accept that we all make mistakes. Terrible mistakes." He looked at me, his eyes glistening. That's more than I deserve, Arthur." "Maybe," I conceded. "But holding on to anger is a heavy burden, and I've carried enough of it." Forgiveness, I was beginning to understand, wasn't about absolving the other person. It was about releasing myself from the prison of resentment. It was a slow, arduous process, a journey I was only just beginning. The weight of unspoken words, of shared secrets was immense, but perhaps, just perhaps, the weight of forgiveness could eventually lighten the load. The path to rebuilding was not a straight line. It was a winding, uncertain trail, fraught with unexpected pitfalls. The tentative steps towards understanding with Robert had been taken, but the foundation of our friendship remained on shifting sands. We continued to meet, the conversation still tinged with a shared melancholy, but there was a new layer of honesty, a raw acknowledgement of the damage done. I found myself looking at my own life with a critical eye. The complacency that had allowed Eleanor's unhappiness to fester, the self-absorption that had blinded me to her struggles, were now stark realities I had to confront. I began to actively seek out opportunities for connection, reaching out to old acquaintances, trying to rekindle relationships that had languished. My days, once dominated by the overwhelming grief and betrayal, started to fill with a different kind of purpose. I took up gardening again, not just Eleanor's garden, but a small plot of land behind the house that had always remained wild. I found a quiet solace in the physical labor, in the simple act of nurturing life from the earth. The dirt under my fingernails, the scent of damp soil felt grounding, real. One afternoon, while working in the garden, Robert appeared, unannounced, but not unwelcome. He carried a thermos of coffee and a bag of donuts. He didn't speak of the past, didn't try to delve into my emotional state. He simply rolled up his sleeves and started helping me clear away weeds. "You don't have to do this, Robert," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "I want to," he replied, his voice gruff. "And I think we both need this. Something constructive." We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the rustling leaves and the rhythmic scrape of our tools. It was a different kind of camaraderie than we'd shared before, stripped of the easy laughter and shared histories. This was a quiet acknowledgement of our shared brokenness and a mutual effort to find something to build upon. "I've been thinking a lot," Robert said, breaking the silence, about the future, for both of us. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, but I hope we can find a way to move forward, together, in some capacity." "I don't know, Robert," I admitted honestly. It's hard. The trust is gone. It's like trying to rebuild a house on a cracked foundation." "I know," he said, looking at the small patch of cleared land. "But sometimes you have to dig deep, remove the damaged parts and build something new on stronger ground. It takes time, and a lot of effort." His words resonated. I had spent so long dwelling on the wreckage, on the shattered pieces of my past. It was time perhaps to start laying new foundations, however uncertain. I began to consider what my life would look like without the constant shadow of Eleanor and Robert's betrayal. It was a daunting prospect, but also strangely liberating. The truth, however painful, had set me free from the illusion. Now I had the opportunity to build a life based on authenticity, however imperfect. The process of rebuilding was slow and arduous. There were days when the weight of the past felt crushing, when the ghosts of Eleanor and Robert's affair seemed to mock my efforts, but there were also moments of quiet progress, of small victories. The garden began to flourish, a testament to perseverance. My conversations with Robert, though still careful, became less strained, more genuine. I was not the same man I had been before. The innocence was gone, replaced by a hard-won wisdom, a deeper understanding of human frailty and the complexities of love and betrayal. But in the ruins of my old life, I was slowly, tentatively, beginning to build something new, something real, on the shifting sands of truth. The autumn air had a crisp bite, a precursor to the winter that loomed. The garden, though past its peak bloom, still held a quiet beauty, a testament to the season's resilience. Robert and I had fallen into a comfortable, if somber, routine. We met a few times a week, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to sit in companionable silence, tending to the garden or sorting through old photographs. The raw pain of betrayal had softened into a persistent ache, a constant reminder of the fractured trust. Yet in our shared melancholy, a strange new bond had begun to form. It wasn't the easy camaraderie of our youth, but something deeper, forged in the crucible of shared loss and difficult truths. One crisp afternoon, while sifting through another box of old photos, we stumbled upon a collection of Eleanor's artwork. She had been a talented amateur painter, and these canvases, tucked away and forgotten, were a revelation. They depicted landscapes, still lifes, and abstract pieces, each one imbued with a quiet intensity. "I never knew she had so much of this," I murmured, gazing at a vibrant depiction of the coastline near our old summer cottage. Robert picked up a smaller canvas, a study of light filtering through leaves. "She was always so private about her art," he said softly. "She said it was her escape, her way of processing things." As we looked through the paintings, a new perspective began to emerge. We saw echoes of her inner world, glimpses of the emotions she had struggled to express. There were pieces that hinted at loneliness, at longing, and even in some of the more abstract works at a turbulent inner landscape. "Look at this one," Robert said, holding up a canvas that featured swirling blues and greys, with sharp, jagged lines cutting through. "It feels almost angry, or desperate." "And this one," I countered, pointing to a painting of a solitary figure silhouetted against a vast, empty sky. "That's how she must have felt, invisible, lost." In that moment, surrounded by Eleanor's silent expressions of her inner turmoil, a profound sense of shared understanding washed over us. We saw not just the wife who had betrayed me, or the lover who had betrayed our friendship, but the woman herself, a complex individual grappling with her own pain and desires. The art became a bridge, not just between Robert and me, but between our fragmented understanding of Eleanor. It allowed us to see her not just as a source of betrayal, but as a person with her own struggles, her own artistic voice, her own hidden world. "She never showed me these," I said, a touch of sadness in my voice. "These private expressions of her soul. She kept them hidden," Robert replied. "Perhaps because she knew they were too revealing, too honest." We spent the rest of the afternoon in quiet contemplation, surrounded by Eleanor's unspoken words, her visual diary of a life lived in shades of grey. The echoes of our shared past, once a source of bitter recrimination, now seemed to hold a fragile promise of a shared future, one built not on denial, but on a deeper, more nuanced understanding of the complexities of human relationships. The art, in its quiet, profound way, offered a form of catharsis. It allowed us to see the woman we had both known, and yet had never truly understood, and in doing so, it began to mend the fractured pieces of our own lives. The shifting sands were beginning to settle, revealing a new, albeit more somber, landscape. The winter had settled in, blanketing the landscape in a hushed white stillness. The garden lay dormant, a quiet promise of spring buried beneath the snow. My house, once a place of echoing grief, now held a different kind of silence, a more peaceful, contemplative quiet. Robert and I had found a rhythm, a new cadence to our lives. We still met, not as often as before, but with a deeper appreciation for each other's presence. The sharp edges of betrayal had softened, not disappeared entirely, but worn smooth by time and a shared, quiet understanding. We were no longer best friends in the way we had once been, but something akin to weathered companions, bound by a complex history. The art Eleanor had created had become a permanent fixture in my home. Her paintings, once hidden away, now adorned the walls, each one a reminder of her complex inner life, her unspoken emotions. They were no longer just artifacts of betrayal, but testaments to a woman's struggle, her artistic spirit, and the hidden depths I had failed to explore. I had also begun to write. Not a formal memoir, but scattered thoughts, reflections on life, love, loss, and the messy, unpredictable nature of human connection. It was my own form of processing, my own way of making sense of the wreckage and finding meaning in the aftermath. One afternoon, Robert came over with a small, intricately carved wooden bird. "My father made this years ago," he said, handing it to me. "He was a craftsman, always said that beauty could be found even in the simplest things." I turned the bird over in my hands, its smooth, polished surface cool against my skin. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was an offering, a silent acknowledgement of the beauty that could still exist, even after the harshest storms. "Thank you, Robert," I said, my voice filled with a sincerity I hadn't felt in years. It's beautiful." We sat by the fire, the quiet hum of the flames the only sound. There were no grand pronouncements, no promises of a return to the past, just a shared understanding, a quiet acceptance of where we were. "I saw Margaret last week," I said, breaking the silence. "Eleanor's sister. She mentioned you'd been in touch." Robert nodded. "I thought it was time to let her know what happened. She deserved to know, too. She always worried about Eleanor. The circle of shared truths was widening, slowly but surely. It wasn't about blame anymore, but about acknowledgement, about understanding the ripple effect of our actions, however unintentional. As the days turned into weeks and the snow began to melt, revealing the first hints of spring, I felt a subtle shift within myself. The heavy cloak of grief and betrayal had not vanished, but it had lightened. I was no longer defined by the past, but shaped by it. I had learned that life, like Eleanor's art, was complex, filled with light and shadow, beauty and pain. I had learned that forgiveness wasn't an end point, but a process, a continuous effort to release the burden of resentment. And I had learned that even in the wake of profound loss and betrayal, it was possible to find moments of quiet beauty, to rebuild on shifting sands, and to look towards a horizon that, while not unmarked by the past, was no longer obscured by it. The quiet horizon beckoned, and for the first time in a long time I felt ready to face it.